to Shout Out from Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host John Harris, as always, and we're back to share our thoughts and reactions to Week 11 of the NFL season. This is a little bit different episode because, it's still reactions, but we're doing a little bit at different timing, so it is literally fresh off the press post Monday night game. So yeah, this will be interesting. But nonetheless, let us dive just right into it because a lot occurred. And so what I had presumed, and probably many, that was going to be one of the better Thursday night games, unfortunately did not come to fruition. I have to go back and check the recording. I may not have, called the jinx, so that you may put the blame on me, people, because Thursday night was looking like should have been a great game. Unfortunately, was not really so much as the Baltimore Ravens take care of business against the Cincinnati Bengals, 34-20. Obviously, the big news too is Bengals lose Joe Burrow for the rest of the season in this game as well. So it was a lot of Jake Browning. So nonetheless. John, what were your thoughts on the Thursday nighter?
Ravens also lost Mark Andrews, so yes. Tough game overall. The Ravens came out with the win, but honestly, with the two major injuries, can't really feel like either team won because, I know Lamar was able to have a pretty solid day, but how often is Odell Beckham going to have 100 yards? Outside of that, the kind of usual, like Zay Flowers got involved, but then everybody else was just mixed in there. And so losing Mark Andrews really sucks, I think, for the rest of their season because he was like the one consistent guy outside of Zay Flowers. And even Zay has somewhat of a limited ceiling. He's a rookie, So Mark Andrews was like the one guy that you could really make the focal point of your pass attack. And he's gone now, so that sucks. Against Cincinnati, they were able to use the run a lot. And like I said, Odell, but I just don't know if that's consistent. So that really hurts for any Ravens fans out there. And then obviously for Bengals fans. With no Joe Burrow, season's probably over. You're 5-5. With Burrow, obviously there was a lot of belief there that they could make the run and make it to the playoffs. But without him, I just don't think that Joe Mixon is going to be efficient enough on the season. I don't think that Jake Browning / whoever they get to potentially play quarterback, if it's not Browning, is going to be able to feed the playmakers enough. And we've already seen throughout the season that both Jamar and T. Higgins have kind of struggled in terms of health at times. So I think this is probably just going to be a lost season for Cincinnati. Maybe they stay a little bit competitive because their defense is still solid. And these are playmakers we're talking about at receiver. But yeah, I think in the AFC specifically with how competitive it is, I just don't see them making the playoffs. So yeah, kind of sucks for the Bengals. But other than that, good win overall from Baltimore. But it just kind of felt like for both sides, honestly, the injuries just really overshadowed the actual game itself.
Agreed. And obviously hurts more for Cincinnati, going down, losing Burrow, and now Browning. We know, as you saw this game, just a whole different level down or two. The offense went down. That's once again not really Jake Browning's fault. Joe Burrow was number one pick. He's a franchise guy. It just happens. They built this team this offense predicated its success on Joe Burrow being Joe Burrow, which we saw for the better part of the beginning of the season. When he was hurt. We saw why. We've seen it basically in regards to offense. So, tough loss there. And then I will say on the flip side too, Zay Flowers could have had more too. That one, I don't know if you remember too. There was like that kind of phantom holding call on that one screen they had to him. So hey, maybe he could have had a better day statistically. But yeah, I think the bigger news, like you mentioned, losing Mark Andrews. We'll see. If. Obviously, it's no one's going to fully replace his value. We'll see how much of that role Isaiah likely can fill, because he kind of defaults into filling that role, which we kind of saw him do a little bit last year. Obviously, different offensive system this year, so who knows if it'll be as the production will be the same as it was last year. For Baltimore, tough because we forget too that they've lost. They had a terrible starting guards of running backs. Lost a bunch of their guys, obviously J.K. Dobbins and such, and then even Ronnie Stanley, their start tackle. he was out this game. And, who knows? He's unfortunately been dealing with injuries and such the past few years. So, it's tough that Baltimore continues to get bitten by the injury bug. And, it'll be interesting to see the path Cincinnati takes going forward. Obviously, T. Higgins was out this game, but, do they continue just to be extra cautious with him and, maybe eventually shut down some of their other studs on both sides of the ball, like you mentioned, because the defense is solid as well. So we'll see what happens there. And, I highly doubt a Minnesota situation will happen for the Bengals. But who knows? We'll see. So tough Thursday night to start the week for both these teams. Obviously, if you're one of the other teams in the division, though, feeling a little bit better about your chances going forward. But we'll see. But speaking of that division, let's continue on talking about ugly games because let's go to Saturday or Sunday's games. Excuse me. Obviously, we expected it to be a slugfest, a typical Pittsburgh type game, and it was as advertised. But oddly enough, it was the Cleveland Browns that outlasted the Pittsburgh Steelers. They out Pittsburgh, and they win this one 13-10 with Dorian Thompson-Robinson as quarterback. So, John, what were your thoughts here in regards to this classic AFC North game?
This is the AFC North. Things are not going to be pretty. These two teams specifically are, renowned for their defense, especially with Deshaun Watson out. Like the way that these teams are both going to win is through their defense, and they're going to be low-scoring games, and that's exactly what happened here. Honestly, the difference maker just seemed to be that Cleveland was able to just kind of weather the storm. And honestly, I was a little bit shocked that Jaylen Warren did not get more touches. It was later in the game, third quarter, like right after halftime, where he got that 74-yard touchdown run. So you could say, well, he had like one big play. But if you remove that one carry, he still has about 50-something yards on 8 carries. Like he was doing great on the game. And I don't get it. I don't understand why the offensive scheme, and this is a Matt Canada question, and honestly, even a Mike Tomlin question, because I really don't understand why Najee Harris, considering how inefficient he is, continues to get a bulk of the workload. I mean, he had 3 more carries than Jaylen Warren did. I just don't understand why that's a thing. I don't know the snap count because Jaylen Warren had 2 more catches than Najee did, but I really don't care about the snap count. I'm more so am worried about who's actually receiving the ball. And just quite frankly, Jaylen Warren right now is the better running back than Najee Harris. He's more explosive. He's able to bust off big plays like we saw there with that 74-yard touchdown. That was really the only life this offense ever had. I just don't understand why, especially a tight defensive battle like this, you're not feeding the guy like the whole way. I don't know. I just don't really get it because, I mean, the rest of their offense is pretty pitiful. I mean, Cleveland's got a heck of a defense, so I'm not going to take that away from them. But Kenny Pickett through the air only had 100 yards. Najee was averaging 3 yards a carry on 12 carries. Like, George Pickens was their leading receiver with 38 yards. Just nothing happened in this game for them offensively outside of Jaylen Warren. And I've heard Steelers fans for years have been calling for Matt Canada's head. And this is kind of one of the most inexcusable ones because you're going against a rookie quarterback who's had 1 career start in which he threw 3 interceptions. I don't even know if he actually started that game. I think he did against Baltimore. He had 3 interceptions that game. In this game, he also throws another interception. You completely limit their run game to where neither Jerome Ford or Kareem Hunt were able to do much of anything. Like, honestly, the only life that Cleveland had was the occasional David Njoku or Elijah Moore play. But even that, they just weren't able to really move the ball down the field consistently until that, Jerome Ford touchdown. So I don't know, a good defensive battle, good for Cleveland. They're now sitting at 7-3, and all of a sudden, following the Deshaun Watson loss, you're kind of thinking maybe there's life here. Maybe they can make the playoffs because if they can manage 3 more wins the rest of the way, does 10 wins get you in? I don't know, but it certainly looks like it's more attainable if their defense could play like this. So good win for Cleveland. Their defense is going crazy. Honestly, in my opinion right now, Myles Garrett's probably the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year. But for the Steelers, man, I'm really confused by the coaching decisions because we already know just the limitations of this team, and yet for some reason, when you have even like in a feed the hot hand moment, they're not choosing to do that, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, just to continue on Pittsburgh's offense, I mean, we say it with other teams, and I think it's fair here too. Like, there's still too much talent for you to be this pitiful, and I think that once again falls on Matt Canada. Like, we know we haven't been most glowing of Kenny Pickett, and hey, he is part of the issue, but like he's a solid quarterback. We've seen that before. We saw a little bit at times last year too, especially like this is an odd kind of regression that the passing game has took, and yeah, they have another year George Pickens. We've all seen all the highlights and all the potential there, and you see why he's having some unrest. Same with Deontay Johnson. He's been a guy that typically before has produced at a high or at least consistent level. The whole Warren Najee Harris thing is like I'm assuming that it's a little bit of like, hey, we got to make sure we keep using our first round running back. And I think it is a little bit anti-Tomlin though, because it seems like Pittsburgh is one of those old school teams where they don't really care about draft position or whatever. They're going to play who they think is best available right now, regardless of undrafted free agent or not. So I wouldn't be shocked if going forward, I would assume like the most logical thing here, but this is Matt Canada and the gang, so I'm sure Steelers fans know this very well too, is that maybe they continue this weird split. But yeah, I'm obviously with you, and I think many are that like Jaylen Warren's a more explosive back, and it goes back to your and many people, mainly yours, ideologies is just don't draft a running back in the first round. That's why it's tough, because then Pittsburgh finds Jaylen Warren a more explosive guy that So nonetheless, sorry I got off a little bit there, but there's just too much talent on the Steelers team. And I know the offensive line isn't great, but like it's still solid and still has some good pieces and such. So yeah, it's just tough in the modern day to be this bad on offense for Pittsburgh. Like Cleveland, we understand, like you mentioned, because it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson and he's struggling. He's a rookie and such. Because like just going to that too, like he had 24 completions and only 165 yards passing. So that's like what, at least 7.5 ish yards per completion. And once again, he had a poor completion percentage too. So that's not counting the balls that got 0 yardage, and they weren't really running the ball efficiently either. So really Cleveland just kind of, like I said, out Pittsburgh, and eventually they kind of came through late with just that late drive at the end to punch that field goal to win it. But it's be interesting to see. I think Cleveland's obviously gonna have to live in this for the rest of the year. They're gonna have to live in the Pittsburgh mindset of just ugling these games up, while Pittsburgh, like as we've seen, like obviously this way of winning is not sustainable. It may get them to the playoffs, but if they really want to think the big picture, which you kind of have to start doing so at this time, like the offense has to take a step. But yeah, like many Pittsburgh fans know, and like I'm not sure that they can or they will. So we'll see if they will do so, or if we'll continue to see more 10-13 games from them, which I feel like is more likely to happen. So that is Steelers Browns. Like I said, Browns getting the win there to kind of stay up in the division. Let's stay in that conference, going to a game that was surprisingly close, and it was the Miami Dolphins hanging on late to beat the Las Vegas Raiders 20-13. A big game for Jalen Ramsey. He had 2 interceptions here, but what were your thoughts in regards to the Dolphins winning this one, John?
Jalen Ramsey, like those picks were both kind of crazy, especially I think it was the second one that was in the end zone where he just like went up and got it. He's playing at an unreal level right now. He hasn't played a ton this season, but so far in the games he has played, he's allowed a 0 passer rating when targeted. He's getting interceptions. I think that's his 3rd on the year. Like, talk about a little bit of a career resurgence. Not that he was terrible last year, because, in my top 5 rankings, I still had him, I think, at number 2 or 3, and it was in large part due to, like, he was still graded incredibly highly, but it just felt like he maybe was having to slow down a little bit. There was concerns of can he actually keep up with number ones on the outside. And like I said, I'm not declaring that he's necessarily back to who he used to be, because prime Jalen Ramsey was unreal. We'll see, and like I said, small sample size this season, but he's been fantastic so far, which is really good to see for the Dolphins. To have somebody like that opposite of Xavier Howard, who we all know is really good as well. Other than that, I thought the game overall was kind of disappointing from a Miami perspective. They certainly had their opportunities to put a lot more points up on the board, and statistically, it feels like they should have. When your quarterback throws for 300 yards, you have a rusher who almost gets 100 yards rushing, albeit it wasn't like, crazy efficient. He had 22 carries, but then even then, like Tyreek Hill makes some big plays. It just feels like they should have scored more than 20 points. Tua did have that one interception, and I think they lost a couple fumbles as well. So, I mean, they kind of kicked themselves in the foot, but if there's any games that you're going to do it in, make it one of those games where you don't really have to try that hard because Aiden O'Connell is going to give you the ball back anyway. So I'm not going to put too much stock into it. But yeah, I just feel like offensively, this was kind of an uninspiring game from them. They were also 3 of 11 on third down. Like, it just felt like Miami this was not a clean performance from them. So yeah, like I said, not putting too much stock into it. Just something to kind of maybe note moving forward as we progress into the season, because, you think back to last year, around this time of the year was when Miami's offense sort of started to take a step back. They, Tua starts to look a little worse. They went on a losing streak. I'm not saying things are devolving to that point, but it just felt like they should have crushed the Raiders in a much larger way.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, because really, kind of when you mentioned with the fumbles, I mean, the fumbles led to 6 points. Like, both those fumbles led to field goals. So, I mean, yeah, you could have been worse in that fashion. Not much to talk about on the Raiders offense. Miami defense, that was pretty much what hit. And then, yeah, in regards to Miami's offense, it would just be interesting. Like, weren't able to get the run game going. And obviously losing Devon Achane hurts, and we'll see his status because he is very key into just being another explosive playmaker for them, as we've seen. And I think I'm just curious to see, like, and to look more into, like, what did the maybe Raiders do something, because we've kind of seen Jalen Waddle / there hasn't really been a clear number 2 this season. I don't know what Waddle's been doing with the injury and such, but I don't know if it's something scheme wise that they're just have found a way to do that, or to limit just this Dolphin offense late in the year. But nonetheless, yeah, that's. You got the win. You're 7-3, and considering the way the AFC is going, that's fine. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see as this time goes on, like we mentioned, if Miami's offense can still be high powered and just continue to produce at this volume and rate that they have. But yeah, Tyreek Hill still crazy good, and once again, I'm going to say it again. I know Tua's been great, he's been awesome. I'm not trying to taking it away from him, but like, Tyreek Hill kind of needs to be in the MVP discussion, at least in my opinion. But we'll see if he can keep up this rate. This is literally historic rate that he's producing at wide receiver. So yeah, good win for Miami. Although kudos to the Raiders for continuing to fight, and maybe there is something more there for them as they get their first loss under Antonio Pierce. But let's move on to what was actually a very good NFC North game, and that was the Detroit Lions getting the win over the Chicago Bears, 31-26. Required a crazy late comeback from the Lions, and they pulled it off nonetheless. So, John, your thoughts here on the Lions win?
Detroit got away with one here. They were kind of outclassed all game, which is very surprising until all of a sudden the fourth quarter, where they outscored the Bears 17-6. They had a desperation, quarter where they made it happen. But that needed some help, as Chicago just kind of lost their fire in the fourth quarter, and then there's that fumble too by Fields on like their last drive where maybe they could have taken the lead. So I don't know, like. This just felt like a game where, once again, similar to the Miami game, I'm not going to put too much stock in it, because as the season progresses, Guys are getting injured. Guys are getting tired. Teams are starting to figure you out schematically. You got to start to make changes, all that kind of stuff. And there's going to be games like this for certain teams. And I feel like Detroit is a little more susceptible than maybe some of the other top end teams just because the secondary and their defense is not very good. And they don't necessarily have the eliteness of like a Philadelphia at certain positions, like defensive line. Not to say they have scrubs, but it's not the Eagles' defensive line, right? So I think that the kind of stuff might happen to them, but ultimately they came out with the win. That said, there's a lot of film to be watching because Jared Goff with 3 interceptions against the Chicago Bears defense is kind of embarrassing. I'm not going to lie. Allowing Justin Fields to run for 100 yards, you got to clean some stuff up. So, like I said, ultimately, all that really matters in the real NFL is the win. But I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of things that other teams are going to look at in this game specifically when it comes to having a matchup against the Lions in the future. Because if a team that has far less talent than the Cowboys, Eagles, Niners, whoever they're going to have to play down the road, if a team with less talent like the Bears is able to do this, then what can those teams pull from this game to try and expose Jared Goff in that offense for as well? So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this game maybe affects them moving forward.
Yeah, maybe it'll give them a little bit of confidence, but I will say, just to add on that, a concern for me going forward, which they kind of answered this game, but like we said, it is the Bears. But can Detroit play from behind too? Are they, like we've kind of been critical of Jared Goff of before, and kind of saw a little bit this game with those interceptions, and they got in the hole early. I think it's a fair criticism because if they can't, which once again, this is only going to probably happen in the playoffs when they play the elite of the elite. Like you mentioned, Philly, San Francisco, probably your Cowboys and such, when they can't control the pace of the game, lean on the run and do things off of that. If it, can they survive and produce on offense the same way, in just in a traditional drop back pass game if they have to come from behind, because it was good to see. Obviously, James Williams caught the big touchdown, but once again, he's probably not involved as many would like. Laporta's kind of slowed down in recent weeks as well, just in regards to production. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown's still producing, and he's awesome. But at the end of the day, he's not like he's a really good number one, but I think it'd be fair to say he's not like an AJ Brown or some of these other true elite number one wide receivers that can beat you in every which way and just break your back on offense. So. Yeah, we'll see if maybe this can be a building block for them. I'm sure Dan Campbell will definitely use that as some more sort of motivation going forward. But nonetheless, sometimes if you're once again trying to become a good team, it's always good to have these kind of games where, hey, we were outplayed, but we figured out a way to win at the end. We got away with one. Maybe keep turning P's and Q's going forward. But big win for Detroit, and for Chicago, just unfortunate. And just adds even more intrigue to what's going to be, what the decision will be at the end of the season if they do have 2 high picks and Justin Fields, of course, because he had a pretty good game. Other than, and once again, that strip fumble, I wouldn't really say really was his fault. You could blame that to offensive line / protection. So good win for the Lions. They go to 8-2. And looking like we said, they may end up as probably maybe the 1 seed with home field advantage, the way things may go with their relatively soft schedule. So there is that. All right, so let's go over to what was one of the upsets, I guess you could say, of the weekend, and it was in your division, as it was the New York Giants with Tommy DeVito beating the Washington Commanders 31-19. So what were your thoughts in regards to this one?
Yeah, I mean, first off, this has major implications in the draft because the Giants got to win, and that can really shake things up. So, I don't know. As a Cowboys fan, I kind of selfishly hope that this becomes like a Jets Trevor Lawrence situation where it's like they look back on this win like, man, it felt sweet in the moment, but couple of years later down the road, we could have had that quarterback if we had that pick. That's what I'm hoping happens, just because that would increase their misery. But in the actual game itself, this was first off, the Giants have a solid defense. Like, let's not get it twisted. We've kind of seen over the weeks that depending on the matchup, they have a solid defense. Now with the Cowboys, they obviously don't do very well. But I think that's in large part because the Cowboys have a really good offensive line. And I think that's what is going to kind of make the Giants struggle, is if you can neutralize Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence and some of the guys they have along the defensive line, well, then things are not going to be great, because their secondary, although solid, is not like, elite by any means. So, but Washington doesn't have an elite offensive line, meaning you can get a lot of pressure. And we saw that. They got a lot of pressure. Washington allowed 4 sacks. And, some of those pressures also resulted in 3 interceptions. But overall, honestly, I mean, yes, the scoreboard would indicate the Giants just kind of shredded them. But Washington had more total yards by over 100, more passing yards, more rushing yards significantly. Realistically, the Giants' rushing attack was pretty ineffective until Saquon had like a pretty big run late in the game. I can't remember how long it was, like 50 yards or something, but it was pretty ineffective. Washington in general was better on 3rd down, better on 4th down, like all these key metrics, right? Less penalties, all these things. The difference is they had 6 turnovers and the Giants had 0. Turnover battle, it's a big problem. And the Giants, I mean, they even got the ball sometimes like deep in Washington territory, so they were able to just convert into touchdowns. And you got to give credit to Tom DeVito and the Giants offense, because they honestly just took what they gave them. And once again, big shout out to the Giants defense, because they forced all those turnovers. So Washington, I mean, you're going to be really upset about this loss, because like I said, when you read all those stats, like, yes, the Giants were able to move the ball successfully. Tommy DeVito had 246 yards, 3 touchdowns on 18 of 26 passing. Like, he looked good. But quite frankly, Washington gave them so many opportunities. And if they play just a little bit of complementary football, maybe even cut those turnovers in half, I honestly think that they're coming out with a win here, even if it was an ugly game, because quite frankly, they're the better team. And they shot themselves in the foot so many times that this is what happens.
Yeah, I mean, you're really putting what I was going to say, basically, which is, the 6 turnovers. I mean, even at the college level, you turn the ball over 6 times, even if, like you said, if you're the better team, it's the way football is. It's just very, very hard to win that way. So I think that's obviously part of Washington's growing pains. And yeah, like you mentioned, credit to the Giants and their offense for just taking care of the ball, literally, even though Tommy DeVito got killed and sacked 9 times. Didn't matter. They didn't, like you said, give the ball to Washington in plus territory. Make things easier for their offense to just punch it in. So, not much there, at least on my end, that I wanted to add, because like you mentioned, these 2 teams going to be picking at the bottom of the draft, and we'll see how it affects the Giants and their what maybe their draft decisions or what they can do in regards to maybe. Because they may want wide receiver, and maybe one of these other teams may be ahead of them that want wide receiver that gets Marvin Harrison Jr., who I'm not I'm just assuming I haven't ranked him yet, but he's kind of already kind of consensus one guy, so we'll see what happens going forward. If this can maybe be some momentum for Mr. DeVito and the gang, but unlikely, as we'll see the direction those 2 teams go heading towards the draft. But let's move on back to the AFC. This one was also self-explanatory, as the Jacksonville Jaguars get back on track and just dominate the Tennessee Titans 34-14. A little bit of bounce back game for Calvin Ridley, and obviously for Trevor Lawrence, coming off that tough San Francisco game. So what were your thoughts here, John, in regards to the Jaguars winning?
A really strong win. The Titans have kind of run the division for a long time, have given specifically Jacksonville a lot of problems, and they're able to come out and handle their business this year. Kind of similar to what they did at the end of last year. So, yeah, it really feels like Obviously last year felt like a passing of the torch moment a little bit going into the playoffs, but this kind of felt like the nail in the coffin of like, yeah, this is Jacksonville's division, barring, maybe some Houston stuff going on, because I'm not quite ready to rule them out yet. But yeah, Calvin Ridley showed up. He's been needing this. I think this will build confidence for him moving forward. Other than that, I don't know. I didn't really have too many qualms with Tennessee's game plan. Like, they lost 2 fumbles. They had more penalties. So they just kind of shot themselves in the foot in certain aspects like that. But other than that, like, offensively, I thought they called it well in order to sort of limit Will Levis's exposure, because you don't want things to get out of hand. We were kind of forcing him into too much, and he just kind of took what they gave him. He was efficient. So yeah, I don't know. I just think, honestly, it was just kind of a talent difference, to be honest. Like, that's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, pretty much all year about how, poor Tennessee's, especially their offensive line is. So the run game was relatively ineffective. There was that one, more 38-yard run, but other than that, relatively ineffective. And then on the flip side, Jacksonville, I took advantage of Tennessee and their poor defense, especially, we're kind of seeing that Tennessee. I have a lot of praise for Vrabel and, their defensive minds, but as of right now, talent isn't there, and especially against these teams that are balanced, like the Jaguars were, especially on Sunday, with not just on the ground but in the air. And hopefully that can continue for the Jaguars, because they've kind of been. We saw in that win streak there's a lot of leaning on the run game to get things going. And granted, they're ahead for most of this game, so not really a true litmus test, but nonetheless, just good to see some sort of connection between Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley, and because that kind of went dry there, even during that win streak for a couple weeks. As I'm sure many Calvin Ridley fantasy owners know, like myself and some others, that there's a little bit of a rough patch there, and it's not just like in terms of fantasy relevance, but lost San Francisco and such. He was relatively a non-factor, so we'll see if that chemistry can keep building between those two, because they're definitely going to need it if we want to mention them among the AFC elites going to the playoffs.
Yeah. I also just want to add too, I don't know if this is a Travis Etienne issue, an offensive line issue, a Peterson issue, but I've kind of been waiting for the efficiency to pick up. On the season, he's averaging like 3.9 yards per carry. It's not like the worst, but I do think that it needs to improve. I don't know. I don't watch the Jaguars closely enough to know fully if it's him, but I do remember from some of the games that I did watch, it just felt like a lot of the run calls are very basic and bland and like, let's just run up the middle between the tackles. And I do feel like ETN is way better when you get him out in space. I don't know, once again, if this is by design, and I'm not even necessarily nitpicking specifically on this game, even though he was inefficient in this one, but it just feels like he's a lot more explosive of a playmaker, and he's not necessarily producing in the way that he should be. And like you mentioned at the end, this was kind of spurred the idea of like, they need Calvin Ridley obviously to be mentioned amongst the elite, but they also are going to need Travis Etienne, because there's going to be certain defenses that are going to be able to take Calvin Ridley away, even if he's balling out, and you're going to need to be able to run against some of those defenses. So
so we'll see if they can do so. And I'll be interested to see going forward, because are they, like you mentioned, like the complexity of the run game? Because I do remember, like, unfortunately I'm blanking on this game, but I do remember Doug Peterson towards the end in Philly. That was an issue. It was like very simplistic in the run game. It was just like inside zone and outside zone. It wasn't very creative, and then there wasn't anything off of that either. So like there wasn't any creative play action, like even just simple play action off of that. So I'd be interested to see. I'm gonna have to rewatch this one, and obviously keep an eye on that going forward.
The ones that stood out to me was the London ones, because like it was the only game on, so like I was paying attention to that, and it was back-to-back weeks. Whereas like I think the Falcons and the Bills, and I don't know, it was both games. It just felt like, all right, we're gonna run the ball, we're gonna run it between the tackles, straight up the middle. Oh, nothing's there. Okay, we're gonna do that again on second down. And it's like, come on, what are we doing? And then like in the Bills game, ETN then bust out a huge run at the end. And I was like, okay, maybe they're just trying to wear him down. But it feels the inefficiency is just happening every week, to the point that I don't feel like this is like a Niner strat where, like the Niners will pound the rock and wear you down. And then at the end of the game, like you're so physically exhausted and they just dominate you there. this doesn't feel like the Jaguars are necessarily executing in that regard, because I also just don't think they have the personnel to do it. So it wouldn't really make sense if that's the plan. So I don't know. Just something to look out for moving forward.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with them. But yeah, and obviously Titans focusing on the the development of Will Levis. So they fall to 3-7. Jaguars go up to 7-3 and stay atop in those AFC rankings. In that standing, sorry, not rankings. But anyhow, let's go over to another stinker per se, or blowout, as your Dallas Cowboys, and thankfully they did, took care of business against the Carolina Panthers, 33-10. They, if you don't remember from the picks video, I had most of my money riding on them. They were one of my 4 wins this week that cashed. So thankfully they did for me. And obviously I'm sure you're happy because obviously you're the Cowboys fan and they took care of business here. So your thoughts?
I'm not going to go too deep into this one. They crushed them. Everybody knew it was going to happen. The Panthers are 1-8 coming in this week. The Cowboys, they handle their business. For the other teams, I will, but even the mismatch games. But honestly, this one, it was just Dallas beating up on a bad opponent. We don't. If you want to see a more detailed explanation of how they do that, go watch the last week's one against the Giants. I'm not going to rant about this one.
Yeah, honestly, just go back and watch our predictions, because
it's probably spot on.
I don't want to say it was spot on. I mean, okay, it had some success in the run game, but regardless, Carolina was behind. Dallas forced some turnovers, yada yada. Dallas is Dallas; they win, and to kind of steamroll over their opponents. So especially lesser talented teams. Which, once again, no offense, Panther fans, but that's the truth of it. So
they know it; they're not going to be offended.
You should know it at this point. If not, I don't know what to do. I can't help you. But let's go to a fan base that's going to need some help, John, as the LA Chargers go into Lambeau and lose yet another heartbreaker under the Staley, or really just the Charger era in the past decade, but been really relevant with Staley, as they lose to my Green Bay Packers 23-20, despite Herbert and Keenan Allen balling out. Your thoughts here on this one?
They gotta fire the coaching staff, man. They have to. Jordan Love has not been awe-inspiring this year. He only has one game in which he threw for over 300 yards. Shocker. It's against the Chargers. He was efficient. He had a lot of yards. He had 2 passing touchdowns. This was the one game that the Packers really had where, they were able to get some big plays out of a lot of different guys. Dobbs has that touchdown. We get the Christian Watson touchdown. Jaden Reed has some big plays. Dontavian Wicks has some big plays. It felt like everybody just kind of was able to get involved. They couldn't take away anybody, except for, I guess, if you want to say Watson in terms of the yardage, but he got a touchdown. He made a big play. So it's kind of inexcusable from the from the Chargers standpoint, because once again, we keep harping back to this. Staley is a defensive coach. People can blame Herbert all they want. He threw for 260 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He was their leading rusher. What more do you want? What more do you want? It's unfortunate for the Chargers that Mike Williams got hurt. It's unfortunate that Quentin Johnson has not really panned out so far like they thought he would and be an instant impact performer when they took him in the first round. He had a crucial drop. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He had a pretty terrible drop that he just simply cannot have late in the game. But for the Chargers, man, even despite the drop, and despite the fact they only scored 20 points, I really did not feel like the offense was the issue, considering the production they had. Eckler, I would like Eckler to get more involved, to be honest, because this was one of the few games where he actually was having a lot of success, and they didn't really feed him. I feel like they could have. He averaged 6 yards a carry. Herbert averaged 9 yards a carry. Run the ball. We've seen other teams have had success running the ball against the Packers, and this is an issue I had with Kellen Moore, and you've said this too in the past. Sometimes he just forgets about running for some reason. I don't know why, but he does. And I don't know, just ultimately inexcusable from the coaching staff as a whole. They should not be here where they are, 4-6, losing to the Green Bay Packers in the way that they did. And unfortunately, to rub salt in the wound, Joey Bosa also going to probably go on IR. They didn't say he's going to miss the season, so hopefully it's just missing 4 games. And I think that's good news for Chargers fans too, because the way that he got carted off with the towel on the head and the tears, it reminded me of when Dak got hurt, and that felt like, oh my gosh, like he's done for the year. But better news than expected. That's my rant on the Chargers. Good win for the Packers. They played well. They did the opposite of what the Chargers did, and that's when things were working, they made it work. Oh my gosh, the run game's not working. They didn't commit to the run game and overly pounding it. They found ways to get involved in the run game creatively with Jaden Reed. If the passing attack's working, boom, they let Jordan Love throw 40 times. Like, good on Matt LaFleur. Good win for the Packers. Embarrassing from the Chargers.
Yeah. In regards to the Chargers, and I've heard it was very good kind of punchline from my boy Sims is like, oftentimes teams are kind of a reflection of their head coach.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing in regards to Chargers little mistakes. You mentioned Dontavian Wicks. I love the kid. Half those yards were like after missed tackles. Yeah. Like even one of them that led, I think, to that last drive was like he was like tackled. Like it should have been an 8-yard gain. 2 Chargers bounce off of him and he runs another 30 yards. Yeah. And then not just on defense, but on offense too. You mentioned obviously the Quentin Johnson drop was tough, but then Keenan Allen himself had a couple of drops. And old like Donald Parham had a crucial drop early in the game when they went for it on a 4th down, which I mean, what's obviously tough on Parham, but hey, it's like when you take these risks and you're a passing heavy team, like we mentioned with like the teams like the Bills, like it's kind of sometimes these like drops, yes, will happen, it suck, but it's because you're passing at a high volume. Nonetheless, yeah, like mistakes like that, and then unfortunately Eckler fumbles later in the 4th quarter, right when they're literally knocking on the door, to score there. Or I think that was 3rd quarter. Oh, sorry, early 4th quarter. When he fumbles there, and that easy could have been 3 points and such, or at least 3, probably 7, maybe there. So yeah, I think days are numbered for Staley. It doesn't help that his, I don't know if you saw that, his press conference afterwards, he was very, very prickly, very defensive. And listen, I'm all for that if it's for good reason, but the seat is scorching hot. And I mean, I've read things and heard things that, hey, like there's a reason the Chargers were looking at other people and considering letting Staley go last offseason, but, I guess they decided to run it back. And just like you mentioned, it hasn't worked out. Remember bringing in J.C. Jackson, that kind of failed. And yeah, the defense really, unfortunately, seemingly has regressed, even with a healthy Derwin James the past year and a half. And
Khalil Mack's playing at like a throwback level. The guy's like 5th in sacks right now.
So yeah, and then you had Eric Kendricks, who's may not be who he once was, but still a solid linebacker. So there's talent there, like we mentioned all the time. There is talent. And there's too much talent for that to be the result. And this to be, like I said, because no Aaron Jones this game. He unfortunately left early. So that many would argue that's the Packers' best playmaker. And like even just to add on to like the silly mistakes, once again, Staley had a defensive head coach on the Watson touchdown. Like he was untouched. Like no one pressed him. There was like no defender near him his entire route. Like that was I'm guessing that was a busted zone. But nonetheless, like you can't have that, especially in the red zone. And then, I mean, it could have been worse too, because Musgrave, I don't know if there was also a drive late in the 4th quarter where Musgrave was wide open down the left sideline, and it was just Jordan Love missed him by literally like maybe an inch or two, off his fingertips of an overthrow, and that could easily even blew the game even more wide open. And Packers also missed a field goal earlier in the game, so yeah, could have literally been worse in terms of the final result for the Packers points over the Chargers if they weren't just a couple say mistakes or whatever on the Green Bay side. But yeah, it's looking just looking like the end for Staley. I'm actually gonna open up their schedule. I'm just curious to see, because usually they have Ravens, Patriots. I feel like especially if they lose to the Patriots, that would be a green light for them to let him go.
I feel like the tough part though is like,
but I don't know if they will, but
I mean, who is on their coaching staff that would be like the interim guy?
Maybe they just make Kellen the interim guy, and then they just find a whole new. But at least for the end of this, till the season ends, because he's the OC. But then probably like, hey, Kellen, you're just filling it till the end of the year. We're probably gonna go with a completely new, group of guys. I feel like if they do,
the tough part for that though is like, first off, he just showed up, but also I don't know, like he had like head coaching interviews last offseason, like, or not last offseason, the season before, with like the Broncos and the Jaguars and all that kind of stuff. And obviously they went the opposite way, but it feels like there'd be like an added pressure almost to make him the head coach. And if you're a Chargers fan, I hope if you hire him as the head coach, I feel sorry for you is all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Interim. Okay, we understand.
Yeah.
Like, that's why I'm like more like maybe they just make him interim, kind of like, unfortunately, like, Rich Bisaccia type thing, although maybe he should have gotten a job. But nonetheless, you know what I mean? We're like, right at the end of the season, okay, we like it, but we're going with someone completely new. We need a clean house here and a little bit of a reset coaching wise. But yeah, realistically, I feel like it'll probably be I anticipate they're going to lose to the Ravens next week. That's who they play on Sunday night. And then they play the Patriots next week, which, as much as I would like to think that would be a perfect time if they lose to, just green light Staley out of there. I wouldn't think that happens, but it's the NFL. I feel like the Broncos won because they play the Broncos the week after. Either Broncos or Raiders, one of those two. Or if they lose, 3 out of their next 4 or 2 out of their next 3, I could easily see him gone, Staley, and then they just so they get the early head start on finding a head coach, because that, as we've seen before, is very crucial for some of these teams to get the early jump. So we'll see what. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, if they lose to the Patriots, man, because I agree, they're going to lose to the Ravens. But not only is it bad you lost to the Patriots, you'll have lost 4 straight. And that's just like, what are they going to be, 4-8 at that point? Like that, I don't know how you keep him at that point, unless like you just are throwing in the towel and you're kind of keeping him, I guess, for maybe the better draft pick, and you don't feel like there's any benefit to firing him before the season ends. I don't know, because I know certain owners, like, they just don't do that. Like the Cowboys have never fired a coach before the season's over, which is why, I've never expected Mike McCarthy to get fired during the middle of a season. At least Jerry Jones has never done that. So like, it's always been there in the offseason. So I don't know. Maybe they wait till after the season. But I just, if you lose 4 straight, you're sitting at 4-8. At that point, the season's basically over. You have to win out, and still probably are not going to make the playoffs, considering it's the AFC. I don't know that if they lose to the Patriots, man, that's going to be bad.
Honestly, the more I sit here and think about it, you mentioned they're 4-6. Like, they lose to the Ravens,
4-7.
I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked they lose to the Ravens, especially if it's not like a close game. I won't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked they let them go right then. And here's next week once again to get an early head start.
Here's what I think makes it added pressure too, is if Justin Herbert continues to play well and they lose, as an owner, how do you not feel that pressure, right? Like Herbert on the season has 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, something like that. Like, he's playing at an elite level in terms of touchdown to interception ratio. He's got great yards. Like, the guy's doing his thing, and yet you just can't win. Like, and obviously the casuals in the media are going to throw that on Herbert. Oh, he's not clutch, blah blah blah. But like, come on. Like, if you're an owner, you've committed the long-term contract to him, and they know how special he is. I feel like, losing to the Ravens, there's added pressure there. The interesting part too is, I don't know if you've heard all these rumors. I don't know if there's any merit to what I'm about to say at all either. But hypothetically, if Bill Belichick is to get fired, that feels like a Chargers, like someone they would go after, right?
I would assume so, especially since we just mentioned there's talent on defense, and Bill I think that would be a good fit, and he doesn't really won't have to develop a quarterback at this point. He can just kind of manage Herbert. And I'm sure, especially if we imagine a Josh McDaniels reunion, like that would be probably a really good OC for Herbert.
Yeah.
And now the big question will be who are they leaving in charge of drafting? Because drafting hasn't been great in recent years, and then we know Bill's had an issue in regards to that in New England. That's part of been the reason of that downfall there.
I mean, I think the GM for the Chargers has honestly done a great job. I mean, maybe outside of the Quentin Johnston pick, which remains to be seen in recent history, the Herbert pick. The what's it called? The Asante Samuel Jr. pick. He's been great. I don't know. I haven't paid attention enough to Zion Johnson if he's been solid, but I don't know. I feel like they've kind of been solid at drafting. Maybe Chargers fans feel differently. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah.
I'd have to pull it up to see more because I mean, first round doing well, but I think also it's key to hit on your second and third round guys too. And we'll see though, because I think it's important to remember like Eckler could walk after this year too, so that all these things are important to factor in for them moving forward. Because and then Keenan Allen, we know how great he is, but at some point it's gonna start. He's getting up there in age where it's gonna start. Okay, when does it start declining? Got there, and we'll see if Mike. Who knows how Mike Williams goes. So be interesting whole situation here. But Staley definitely a guy. Like I said, I'm not trying to be mean, but it's just definitely you can definitely tell he knows that he's literally on eggshells at this point.
Yeah,
in terms of his status there.
Just on the Chargers draft picks, honestly, they're kind of hit or miss when you actually pull up the full list. Like the notable good ones.
Tillery was a miss.
Yeah, Tillery was a miss. I mean, the notable good ones like the Justin Herbert class, like Kenneth Murray's been kind of iffy. Josh Kelly's done basically nothing. I mean, that was a 4th round pick after that. Nobody notable. Rashawn Slater, he was solid. Asante Samuel Jr., also solid. Josh Palmer, solid. That class, honestly, solid, like as a whole. So that's pretty good. Trey McKitty, he's another 3rd round pick, though. Tight end hasn't really done much for them. Then the next year, Zion Johnson, they don't have a 2nd round pick. JT Woods, Isaiah Spiller, just kind of class. I don't know how to fully feel because that was also last year's class, so I don't know how to feel about all those guys yet. And then this year's class, remains to be seen. So, it's been a hit or miss. So, but better than Bill Belichick. That's all I'll say. Better than Bill Belichick.
We'll see. So maybe they just keep the same. We'll see. And it's LA. Yeah, it's LA. So who knows? But nonetheless, I guess good confidence from my Packers. Just like last year, I can't mentally. I want to keep trying to eliminate them, but technically they're not out of this.
Yeah,
they probably will be. I know that's. It's just the only thing I hate is this. Not that I don't want Jordan Love out. It's just this wasn't. I don't feel like this was a curved, a test that was on a curve. In his favor against the Chargers. I'm not sure this is a great one that I can use on this resume, but nonetheless, he got the Packers offense got the job done. Despite losing Aaron Jones. So obviously that sucks for Aaron Jones, and we'll see what happens there. So nonetheless, though, good confidence win for that young Packer team. But now let's move on over to the Houston-Arizona game as the Texans won this one 21-16. Although it was a tale of two halves as they had a great first half, especially offensively, and the second half was much rougher, but they still hang on here to win. What were your thoughts in regards to the Texans' win over our Arizona Cardinals?
Solid win. This was definitely C.J. Stroud's worst game because of the 3 picks, but he had 336 yards, which I think was the most across the league. So, I mean, he did that, and he also had 2 touchdowns. So the second half was pretty gross from both teams. I don't know if there was something Arizona sort of figured out about their offense that made this happen for CJ Stroud, where he was making some poor decisions and just overall they were not able to score at all in the second half. But, we're talking about, speaking of coaches that need to kind of really hone in on what their side of the ball is. Your offense can't score. Well, guess what? D'Amico Ryans and that defense stepped up big time, only allowing 6 points in the second half, not allowing a big furious comeback. And that's what you do. Maybe your special quarterback is having a bit of an off week. The offense is staling. You gotta show up. You gotta give the guy some help sometimes. And that's what the Houston Texans did. Sure, it was against the 2-9 Cardinals, but as we've seen, the Cardinals are a competitive team, and so I feel like this was a resilient win from the Texans. But certainly, a game where they're going to want to maybe try and add some wrinkles and adjustments because it does seem like the Cardinals were able to do something that no team has been able to do on the season so far and give Stroud some trouble. Not stop him, but certainly give him some trouble.
Yeah, and at least 2 of them were, I would say, they're on Stroud, they're poor decisions and such, which is rare going up to this point. So once again, I'm not sure, like you mentioned, if that's something Arizona did or just, hey, it was a kind of welcome back to earth moment for Stroud after such a hot start. But because it's odd, because I mean that was mostly the second half. First half, he was lighting it up. It was looking he was continuing to take it, just continue his hot streak, and he cooled off in the second half. So we'll see, what it'll be interesting to see what they do there. But another good game on the ground for the Texans, regardless for them. And once again, I think obviously Devin Singletary, good for him. Another Bills, him and Zach Moss, like, I don't know, doing better post Bills. Starting to make, once again, our criticism of them, their scheme and such. Like, man, maybe they had the right eye for talent. They just didn't utilize it. But nonetheless, Singletary making the most of his opportunity. And yeah, I mean, we should see. I forget because I had Damian Pierce in a few leagues, but I haven't like checked back on him. I know he was obviously out this game, but it'd be interesting to see like maybe he starts kind of eating into his role, or if they maybe shut down Pierce the rest of the year. Like I don't know how serious the injury is, but at least regardless, Singletary had a really good game. And Tank Dell, he may like I may be wrong, maybe he could be the number one guy the way he's been producing and the chemistry he has with Stroud. Because once again, he had a really great game, and obviously Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz are interesting pieces as well. Good complementary pieces for that offense. So
I just want to say about Tank Dell too. Shout out to the Texans for trusting their young quarterback, because I saw a video this past week of I don't know, they were showing it somewhere, and Stroud apparently he had kind of somewhat been familiar with Tank Dell, but during the combine, they, some of those drills, like he was throwing for Tank Dell and then Tank Dell was receiving for Stroud's drills, and they liked each other. They talked, and Stroud was like, hey man, that was awesome. Who knows, maybe we'll get drafted together. They draft Stroud, and the day one is over, and Tank texts him to congratulate him, and then adds in like, hey man, tell him to come get me. Stroud says, I got you. Then texts him the next day, says, hey, I told him I want you. 20 minutes later, Tank Dell gets the call. They drafted him. I don't know where he was on their board, so I'm not going to say it was all Stroud, but your quarterback, they trusted him. He says, I want this guy. Boom, they go out and they get the guy. I just, and it's proven to pay off, because like you said, Tank Dell's been absolutely balling.
And Tank being versus Houston, who knows? There's always that story too. Stroud literally saying like, "Hey, like as soon as I got drafted, yada yada." Like there's a concerted effort, or maybe just a natural connection. Regardless, they got a connection.
Yeah.
It seems like both on and off the field, so that can always help. I know you and our friend Dog always mentioned the Stafford Breakfast Club and such.
Yeah.
So
Puka's in the Breakfast Club too. Puka Nacua requested to be in it. So it's a thing, guys. It is a thing. That's all I'm saying.
It is a real thing. So nonetheless, good win for the Texans. They keep rolling. Cardinals, still a good performance from Kyler. They're kind of like in the Bears situation where it's like, man, like, are you really going to be able to move on? Because like Kyler's kind of balling, and you could, instead of getting the quarterback, you could just keep building around the one you currently got. So we'll see. They are also in kind of that interesting quandary like Chicago. But moving on, let's go to San Francisco, where the Niners took care of business against the Buccaneers 27-14. Kind of went the way we thought, as the Niners continue to dominate. And we Tampa Bay, even though they had a couple of solid performances, we know who they are. It showed the two different classes in the NFC here. But what were your thoughts, John, in regards to the Niners win?
I don't have a ton. It was business as usual for San Francisco. Honestly, the only thing I really wanted to point out from this game is the unfortunate injury to Tufanga, their safety. And the guy, I think he's one of the more underrated players in the league, because he's a Pro Bowl, all pro level talent in that back end, and he's just been everywhere for them over the last few years. And I specifically obviously notice him, when Dallas has to play them a lot, because he just does a whole lot for them that doesn't necessarily get credit. He's like the Fred Warner of the secondary for them, like where Fred covers so much ground and so many areas of the field and mistakes maybe from other players, or just reads so much. Tufanga does that for them on the back end, and they're able to move him around a lot of spots. He's injured and out for the season. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily like panic time, but it did feel like after the injury, the Buccaneers offense was able to find some success with some big plays. Obviously, it's a very short notice situation where the coaching staff, the players, they haven't had time to like communicate and adjust for what happened and figure ways to overcome that. So I'm not saying that it's, oh my gosh, the Niners are done for, but it is something to look out for moving forward the rest of the season, because if there's maybe a weakness there, then we're gonna see, you know, the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Lions, some of these other teams certainly take note of it and maybe try to expose it later down the line, since he'll unfortunately not be there. So just something to look out for. Otherwise, you know, business as usual for the Niners. They dominated on offense and they were able to, you know, do their thing on defense outside of the Tufanga injury.
Yeah, I mean, just to add off that, I mean, I mentioned this in our group chat. Like, shout out to Ayuk. You know, a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
was famously in the Shanahan doghouse, and now he's actually been a critical piece for them this year. And yeah, obviously, hey, Purdy had a great game. Obviously, you know, good bounce back and made all the throws he did and such. And yeah, like you mentioned though, for the Bucks, I mean, kind of a one-dimensional offense and a lot of kind of empty calories there, especially, you know, really 27-7 and then score that touchdown in the fourth quarter. So yeah, we'll see how the Funga injury affects the Niners going forward, who they can, you know, try to get to replace him. Because yeah, I am in agreement with the fact that he does a lot that doesn't quantify onto the stat sheet, but helps the Niners overall. And remember too, they let go, you know, let Jimmy Ward walk this offseason, probably because they felt comfortable and, you know, hey, we got Hufanga, and, you know, we can let Jimmy Ward walk. And now you unfortunately lose Hufanga. All right, what's the insurance plan after that? I don't know off the top of my head. So yeah, we'll see though. They'll still be fine. They're still gonna be a playoff team. It's like the world's falling apart, but just interesting. As we go later into the season and into the playoffs, you know, just another key chess piece off your board, potentially. So Niners get the win over the Bucks there. Let's move on over to the West Coast. Stay there-ish, I guess, where we're going to the LA Rams. We mentioned the Breakfast Club earlier. They were feasting on the the Seattle Seahawks in a close one, 17-16. They sweated this one out. A little bit of a late rally by Stafford and the gang, despite losing Cooper Kupp early in the first half. And I know that mainly because I have Cooper in a couple of leagues, so that hurt. So I felt that pain. Nonetheless, like I said, Rams overcome it. Seattle had a chance at the end. Unfortunately, missed the game-winning field goal to win the game. So, John, what were your thoughts on the Rams beating the Seahawks for the second time this season?
Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, the week 11 was brutal. The Burrow injury, the Mark Andrews injury, the Joey Bosa injury, like the, you know, Hufanga injury, all these different guys. And the injury bug carried over into this game too. Kenneth Walker goes to the sideline. I don't think they've said he's a candidate for IR. So they're not expecting him to miss 4 games, maybe a couple here. Hopefully he doesn't miss any, but I don't think it's been announced yet how much he's going to miss. Cooper Kupp goes down. He's considered day-to-day with a sprained ankle. You know, Geno Smith went down at one point in this game. He did come back, but he was injured, and we had to see a Drew Lock sighting. It was kind of a tough game on both sides with the injuries, moving the ball. Like it was a defensive game. The Rams come out on top. They're 4-6. They're not totally out of it, but I feel like they did kind of get away with one here. I think if Geno's healthy the whole game and they don't, you know, have to throw Drew Lock in there, I think that's the difference maker, you know, where they lost by 1 point, right? So, yeah, I don't mean to put like all the blame on Drew Lock, but, you know, he did throw an interception. If Geno's in there, maybe that's a successful drive. Even if Kenneth Walker's in there on the rest of the game, maybe they were able to have still that dynamic punch between him and Charbonnet and were able to get more done on the ground. Just in general, I mean, Seattle kind of had their opportunities, and yeah, they just weren't able to take advantage of it. Also, there was a lot of penalties in this game, and although the Rams had 9 penalties for 92 yards, Seattle had 12 for 130. Very undisciplined game. They need to clean that up because that's 130 penalty yards is crazy.
Yeah, that is wild. You mentioned Drew Lock, and hey, I want to put on the record. Remember when it came out, I was pro Drew Lock. Obviously, it's been his biggest bug with decision making, and that was a tough interception to throw. Yeah. That really led to 3 points, and like really gave after a Rams touchdown, like just continued their momentum. Like you didn't really give your defense a chance to breathe, and the Rams go on it. It's a long drive, 1475 yards, but nonetheless, your defense had to, like I said, go right back out a minute later after just, you know, they're just surrendering a touchdown to go and, you know, hold them off. And then, yeah, unfortunate. Some people too did criticize a little bit of the Seattle's clock management at the end there. because they kind of let the clock run down a bit. Maybe could have gotten another play or two, gotten the field goal closer, as opposed to having to kick a 55-yarder. That's a fair criticism there. Although maybe they were concerned about the amount of throws that Gino had to make and such. I don't know, but I mean, we mentioned before, Seattle offense not entirely creative. Once again, just relying upon their guys making plays beyond the X's and O's, or maybe because of that. And when you lose Kenneth Walker, who's one of those people that can be a home run hitter, we saw DK early on, but once again, like we've seen before, Seattle has a bit of an early burst and then runs out of steam at the end, runs out of tricks. And we saw that here as the Rams kind of caught on to it, and they weathered the storm despite, both quarterbacks. You mentioned, Gino got hurt this game. He got drilled. I put in our group chat. Even Matthew Stafford at one point, I thought he was going to be off of this game too, because he got absolutely clocked as well. So, it was definitely, the score indicates what it was. It was a rough game, not very pretty. Typical Seattle kind of style, Pete Carroll, but it just didn't go their way because, crucial turnover late in the game. But, Rams kind of keeping hope alive at 4-6, while Seattle, this hurts. And as we mentioned, they are now in a super tough part of their stretch of their schedule with Niners, Cowboys, Niners, Eagles. Yeah. Those are their next 4 games. Over the next 4 weeks. It's not like they have a bye. They have Niners in 3 days.
Yeah, that's tough.
And then Cowboys, and I guess they have kind of a mini bye because they have I think a 10 days in between the Cowboys and Eagles game or next Niners game. But still, that's never easy too, especially both in 2 in a row road games. So we'll see if they can somehow manage to pull through on those. But regardless, tough loss for them in regards to the standings. And obviously, confidence-wise. But let's move back on over to the AFC. And for the last game of the afternoon slot, it was the Buffalo Bills handling their business, getting back on track game as they beat the New York Jets 32-6. Could possibly be Zach Wilson's last game, as we're recording today. Already announced they will be starting Tim Boyle, and then even had Trevor Siemian listed as the backup. They went as far to throw Zach all the way down to the 3rd string. But nonetheless, in regards to this game, John, what were your thoughts?
I thought this was the Bills' best game of the season. I know they're playing the Jets, who have their issues, but the Bills' defense has been pretty pitiful, and you're playing against Breece Hall, a really good running back, and they absolutely destroyed him. They limited him miserably to only 23 total yards on 10 carries. He did have 5 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown, but just being able to stop the run and making them very one-dimensional and having to rely on Zach Wilson and then Tim Boyle, that was a win from them. So that was good to see from the Bills. Also, totally taking Garrett Wilson out of the game, 2 catches for 9 yards. Their leading receiver outside of Breece Hall was Jeremy Ruckert, who's basically been kind of irrelevant so far at this point to his career, which, it's nice to see him get involved because he's a young tight end. Maybe we could see him get more involved as, things go on. But yeah, I thought this was a very good game from the Bills. Josh Allen, almost 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. He threw a pick, but it was an interception right before halftime on a Hail Mary attempt. So I put 0 weight in that turnover on the day. He was fantastic against a really solid defense too. Shout out to Khalil Shakir, who made some big plays. They got back to the run game, which I like to see. Latavius Murray, James Cook, a little bit of Ty Johnson. He also got involved in the receiving game, which will be an interesting piece to look forward to maybe moving forward as they're kind of starting to incorporate a lot more running backs. Still remains to be seen if they actually use Leonard Fournette, which I assume they will. I think he's probably going to take over the Latavius Murray snaps, to be honest, because Latavius has not really been that great this year. And Latavius is a little less dynamic than Fournette in terms of his ability to catch the ball. So I don't know. Yeah, good win from the Bills. I thought this was the most impressive game of the season, just top to bottom. They won all 3 phases, and that's what you got to do. On the Zach Wilson thing, you kind of kept bringing up the grass is not always greener. If you want to start Tim Boyle, go for it. In this game specifically, they both completed 7 passes. Zach Wilson attempted 14. Tim Boyle attempted 14. So they basically had identical sample sizes. It's not pretty from either one. Zach Wilson had 81 yards, touchdown, and a pick. Tim Boyle had 33 yards, 0 touchdowns, and a pick. So Tim Boyle is worse than Zach Wilson. They can go to him if they want to. We were talking about this earlier in our little group chat with Matt, and I don't even know how Tim Boyle is an NFL quarterback. His college stats, if you don't know his college stats, guys, this is ridiculous. He, in 3 years of college football, had 1 passing touchdown and 13 interceptions. How does that man, 4 years post-graduation, make it to be an NFL backup quarterback? I really only think he's in the league because like maybe he's friends with Aaron Rodgers or something. I don't know, because he starts his career with your Packers. He's there for 2 years, goes to Chicago and Detroit, and now he's back with Aaron Rodgers in the Jets. Maybe he's like a locker room guy, like he's really smart or something and is able to help with the playbook. But at that point, like just make him a coach. I don't understand why he's a quarterback. I think it's going to be miserable with him moving forward. I would rather start Trevor Siemian if you're going to have to pick between the two. Go get Joe Flacco back before the Browns did. I don't know, but like if you're gonna get rid of Zach Wilson, I at least like that they're not like doing what they did last year, where they like kind of keep him involved. Like if you're gonna get rid of him, just cut ways. You know, we've had this conversation before, so I'm not gonna rant too much longer. But just let the guy go, because clearly this marriage between the Jets and Zach Wilson is just it's never gonna get fixed.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, well, I have no clue. I almost, just side note, when in one of those years he's in Green Bay, because I went to the 2021, I forget, it's been a while, 2019. I went to a game where he was there. It was the last game of the season when I went. And I remember pregame, like, oddly enough, I was like, so I guess he plays catch with the fans. I kind of wanted him to come to our section. He didn't. So, yeah, screw you, Tim Boyle. Just kidding. But yeah, I have no clue how I didn't even know those things until you told me. Cause like, he was one of those guys, especially when you have Rodgers, then we obviously had Jordan Love for a bit. Like, you don't really care who the third string is, I guess, per se, you know? And yeah, Tim, and then I didn't even know until very recently, even before today, or, you know, Sunday, that he was still on, like, I guess he had followed that regime. Yeah, like you mentioned, maybe it's just this familiarity thing. We'll find out. And regardless, I don't think the result's going to be that much better than Zach Wilson behind center. So I think it's just another.
I think it's gonna be worse.
Like
just quite frankly,
I think it's just them trying to, you know, throw him out, appease the fans. Say, hey, like, see, this is what we did. I don't think they're gonna go back to Zach Wilson. No. I think if anything, they'll just go Trevor Siemian, and then hopefully they can survive until Rodgers maybe comes back. Once again, if Rodgers comes back and they're, you know, 4-8,
no,
you're done.
He should not come back this
cooked.
season. He should not. Considering the record, yeah, unless they all of a sudden start winning with Tim Boyle, no, he should not.
Saying the record and the fact that we've already mentioned that line is no good. Like if it has issues protecting now with a healthy young Zach Wilson, hey, he's not a great quarterback, but we've seen he can be elusive, and that's part of the issue. Like what are you going to expect with Rodgers? Literally, I know it's amazing recovery, a couple of months off Achilles at 40. Like I don't know. Yeah, so we already had that conversation before. But yeah, in regards to the Bills, all I want to mention is patience. They were, like I said, you mentioned patience with the run game. Patience in general, willing to settle for field goals early on, as opposed to going for the jugular, things like in Josh Allen. Very good decision making. I love that. Thank you for mentioning the interception that really doesn't really count because it was at the end of the half, Hail Mary type.
And I have to mention it because people are going to use that at the end of the year of like, oh, he threw X number of interceptions. But when you apply context, all of a sudden, like, oh, 3 of them were Hail Mary, and then now it's not as big of a number.
Yeah, because you say, hey, he threw 3 touchdowns, 0, technically 0 interceptions had impact. Like, yeah, like that was a damn good game. Many teams will take that from their quarterback. The Jets would love, once again, Jets fans would love Josh Allen to be running around them.
They would love a single game of 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Just one. Just one game where the quarterback goes crazy.
That's what they dream about for that Tim Boyle is going to produce next Sunday. That's like, that's what they're dreaming about right now. So, yeah. Great game by, I'm not sure if this is going to elevate them over the top. Like this is a Jets team that's kind of on the down spiral right now. But hey, good performance, encouraging things. I just don't think at the end of the day it will push them over the top over the AFC elite. Although, however, this broad picture, who knows? Because the leagues, we'll continue to talk. But man, it's. Actually, with the elimination of a couple teams like the Bengals and such, I'm sorry, but Bengal fans, you're done. No Burrow. Like maybe Buffalo can sneak in and make noise if they just get into the dance. But we'll come to that time and talk about that at another time. But nonetheless, crucial win for them, and as they stay in that race, and get a bounce back win. But let's go to the Sunday nighter, which was also a pretty good game as the Pastronaut and Russell Wilson were going at it. Obviously between the Broncos and Vikings. Broncos win this one with a late touchdown, 21-20 over the Vikings. What were your thoughts here in regards to the Broncos getting another victory?
Good win for the Broncos. What a catch by what's his name? Cortland Sutton. Sutton. I like that. Yeah. I mean, it was a solid throw from Russ. Not gonna say it was like fully intentional to be what it was, but just the decision of I'm gonna let my playmaker go up and get it, and I'm gonna put it real high because I know that he can outjump some guys. Like there was intentionality behind like where he put it. It was just kind of one of those plays where it's like, all right, I'm just gonna let my guy make a play, and I love that decision because Cortland Sutton is one of those guys that can absolutely do it, and he did it. He made a play. And that was really, I mean, that was the icing on the cake for the Broncos or for the Vikings right there. That said, man, the Vikings, another game in which a team really kind of shot themselves in the foot. They were generally the better team on the day. They outpaced the Broncos in terms of yardage, almost had 100 more total yards. They destroyed them in the run game. They had 175 rushing yards to the Broncos, 46. Passing yards wise, Denver did have a little bit more. But it was largely even. Denver was 2 of 12 on third down, which is miserable to where the Vikings were much better, but they were 6 of 15. So there was a lot of things here, right? But the Vikings had more penalties, and they had 3 turnovers to Denver's 0. Very similar to that Washington game where they just shot themselves in the foot too many times, and you can't do that. Like, you can't do that. I'm not going to sit here and blame any individuals. Like, Dobbs didn't have the greatest of games in terms of the turnovers, but he's still relatively new. And honestly, he, besides the turnovers, had a solid day, 220 passing yards, a touchdown. He also ran for a touchdown. So it is what it is. But yeah, it's one of those games where the Vikings are going to be upset because their hot streak of wins, they could have been 7-5, but they just made too many mistakes.
Yeah, and talk about the mistakes. As we always say, like what happens off those two, and that's literally 6 points once again. Like 6 points off the fumbles, from Madison and the early one from Dobbs. And yeah, I mean, I think it's also in regards to Denver, it's kind of ironic because remember last year that was their issue. It's like, man, they keep turning the ball over, things like that, and we're starting to see the Sean Payton effect, kind of settle in. Obviously, Russell's been playing really well. Really good. We're seeing a little bit of the Russell magic still, and some good plays from him, and in that offense staying on track. It's not going to be absolute world beaters, but hey, they do enough to keep the ball moving at times. I know they're not punching it in the touchdown outside of Cortland Sutton. There's a lot of field goals, but hey, I'm sure that's something that they get as time goes on, we'll iron out more as Russell gets more familiar with Sean Payton and vice versa. Payton getting more and more familiar with his strengths and what they're both reading and seeing out there on the field. For Minnesota, I mean, we all it's kind of been a little bit of a fairy tale story because, like we mentioned, I mean, they lost all these people and they've still been relevant. And once again, I'm not saying it's absolutely over. Like that's obviously they had their chances this game. And they may get Justin Jefferson back soon. So obviously, I don't care what quarterback you are. Dobbs is competent enough to get him the ball. That will be an upgrade. Be interesting to see how the Vikings fare going forward. And for Denver, yeah, maybe they may make some noise because we're seeing this defense, like you mentioned, just make some plays as well. Like we mentioned going last year, like there's obviously talent there. It's just they need to play complementary football on both sides, and now the offense is starting to hold their end of the bargain. They're winning games. I was gonna come up with a wild theory, but luckily I saw that Russell Wilson had no trade clause, so that wouldn't work. My crazy theory, just to sum it up, that was like, man, like maybe like Peyton's like really getting the most out of Russell, then they're gonna move on from him and like I don't know, swindle somebody, but. A, I don't think that. I mean, that was already unlikely to happen. And B, Russell has a no trade clause, so yeah. I don't think they can't bamboozle Russell like that. So good for him on getting that. Because if I was a GM, I would be a devious one. But nonetheless, Denver 5-5, outside looking in, but who knows? Maybe they can sneak into the playoff picture in the AFC, just like the Vikings are as well. But let us move on to the game that just occurred, about an hour-ish ago for us. Obviously, as we were listening, it's previously longer than that, but it was the Monday Nighter, quite a good one, Super Bowl rematch between the Chiefs and Eagles, and it was the Eagles this time getting the best of the Chiefs, 21-17, and quite an exciting game, just like last year. A little bit of inverse, as the Eagles were the ones that had the second half surge, unlike the Chiefs. Last year the Chiefs making the late surge to win. So what were your thoughts here, John, in regards to the Eagles getting over the hump and beating the Chiefs?
I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but this felt like another game in which the better team shot themselves in the foot too many times. And I don't say better in a disrespectful way to the Eagles, because I know the Eagles fans are going to be very upset about the fact that I just said that and they won and blah, blah, blah. The Chiefs had 100 more total yards. They had 40 more passing yards. They had 50 more rushing yards. They averaged more yards per play. They were better on third down. They were better on fourth down. They allowed far less sacks. Like every single metric, they had less penalty yards. Every single metric, the Chiefs were better. But they had one more turnover, and both of their turnovers were in the red zone. That's brutal for the Chiefs. And not to mention the MVS drop, which I know that you're going to talk about. So the Chiefs, they should have won this game. They shot themselves in the foot too many times. Travis Kelce had a drop too. I think he made up for it later in the game, but like he had a pretty crucial drop. Like there was just too many times that the Chiefs had opportunities and they weren't able to take advantage of it. And this was the first game that I really felt like a team was able to shut down the Eagles offense entirely. I mean, DeAndre Swift had some big plays, but other than that, and Devonta Smith had some big plays too, specifically that one that, he just beat his guy one-on-one and he got open on the back end and it gave the Eagles life all of a sudden and was able to get them that third touchdown. But A.J. Brown had 1 catch for 8 yards, which bless up, because I needed him to score less than 4 points in fantasy, and he did not score 4 points, so that was huge for me. But he was completely irrelevant. Devonta Smith before that one play was having a pretty mediocre game. It really was just DeAndre Swift, and the Chiefs defense was looking for real, man. And then they shot themselves in the foot too many times offensively. And yeah, like I said, first game I felt like the Eagles were truly stopped on offense until very late with a few plays. But also the first game that I was like, man, how did the Chiefs allow the receiver situation to get this bad? Because yes, it's bit them in the butt in some other games like the Broncos won and all this kind of stuff, but you're playing against a premier team and it was so obvious that the receivers are just not good. They're not good. And I don't know, it's just bad. How do you not trade for somebody at the deadline? How did you not fix this going into the season? Did they have a lot more confidence in Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore? They're just non-factors. McCole Hardman's not really a factor. It's literally Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, and now they're starting to rely on Justin Watson. This is just this. It's bad, man. Because Mahomes was making some great throws, like that MVS throw where it's on the money. They could take the lead with a touchdown, and people are just not making plays.
Yeah. Obviously the MVS drop completely brutal, and I have said this on the podcast before. I just always forget because sometimes, but I'm pretty sure I've mentioned the whole MVS drop thing. I don't mean to dog on the guy. Obviously he's a very skilled person, but it was a thing in Green Bay. I always felt like I would kind of make it a joke. He's due for a drop every game. He's due for a drop.
Heard you say that many times.
I've said this since and listen, he's a great player. You just. Sometimes it happens with some guys. It just, Ted Ginn used to be infamous. Remember Ted Ginn Jr. used to be infamous for man, obviously he's great speed, but he would always have bad drops where it's you're walking open and you dropped it. So yeah, obviously that happened for the Chiefs, like you mentioned, just tension, those little things. And I wonder if maybe you mentioned why is this, why are we seeing this bit of a drop off? I wonder if maybe it's a little bit of the loss of Eric Bieniemy too.
Could be
because. You remember, and Matt Nagy is the OC now, and I don't know, no offense to Matt, but I remember I was very critical of him in his Chicago days because he was a lot like Andy Reid, where he did have the window dressing the motions, but unlike Reid and even I would say Bieniemy wasn't great at tying those into intermediate to deep plays. And I wonder if that's kind of if that's an issue. His ideology. I don't know. Is Andy Reid still calling the plays? So like I don't know. And maybe it's sort of attention to detail for those receivers or ideas. Because I mean, I'm with you. It is a bit odd. I once again, I think the Chiefs were maybe a little confident in the guys they had coming in, like you mentioned. Like obviously, it sucks that Tony got hurt in camp. I think that was a big thing. But hey, maybe Rashee Rice is the guy going forward to be that consistent, or like you said, maybe Justin Watson.
I mean, I like what I've seen out of Rashee Rice, and I certainly think that he can be a factor moving forward. But like, if he's the best you have, like he needs more time. Like it's ridiculous to think that the Chiefs are gonna like they're a Super Bowl contender and that's the best you got. Like you gotta have someone else. And there had to be some veteran options out there. Like I don't know, imagine they went out and got Adam Thielen in the offseason instead of letting him go to the Panthers, or I don't know. It feels like there had to have been options somewhere. I don't know what actually Adam Thielen got paid. He might have got paid a lot because bad team, like cap space, but.
Yeah, and I think that's important thing to remember too is like a couple things. The Chiefs strapped for money, so maybe that happens a bit when you have a great quarterback. Is you kind of be like, he can make plays, and we can be okay with less than receivers than we would like, or also inversely, like teams are like, no, we're not going to trade. They maybe start holding the Chiefs' feet over the fire, in regards to maybe if the Chiefs we're interested in a couple of receivers. We're like, oh, we're interested in our guy, we're the Chiefs, so like we're gonna raise the price a little bit here because we know that you really need a wide receiver. So
I will say, I mean, the Cowboys got Brandon Cooks for a fifth, so like there were players they could have got. I don't know what the price would have been for the Chiefs, maybe because it's still the AFC. The Texans asked for a fourth or something, but like. I can't believe that like this is the best they got. I don't know. I'm just kind of shook. Like the Brett Veach, like what are we doing here, buddy? Like you got Patrick Mahomes and he's throwing a who knows who. Like this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah, and like I said, I wish I probably should bring it up, but like I was like remember too, they were a little bit in cap. Hell, and because that was like that's what led to the Chris Jones holdout. Even going to the season was that they've been strapped for cash because obviously they're paying Mahomes and Kelsey, a good amount of money.
Yeah, I know that's a realistic thing. It just feels like, man, like this is your Super Bowl window, dude. And like obviously they didn't know the defense was going to be this good, but it's just a shame to see the Chiefs with an elite level defense right now. You have Mahomes and Kelsey, and it just feels, and Pacheco's been great. And it just feels like if they had one reliable guy on the outside, that they would be just killing everybody.
Yeah. So, and last thing I want to really note is just, shout out Trent McDuffie. You mentioned,
he's a stud.
Kids balling, doing a lot of different things for them. And like you mentioned, that defense, very young too. Remember, they had a lot of young pieces. They've been filtering in and out, letting some guys go. Honey Badger a couple of years ago. Hey, they find great value in Justin Reed. And then, George Karlaftis has been very solid for them. Even like the linebackers. Yeah,
Willie
I know.
Gay. He's been good.
Willie Gay. And I know Nick Bolton's been out for a couple of weeks, but he's been key for them the past couple of years. And even then, Drew Tranquill hasn't been that bad of a fill-in for Nick Bolton's absence. And obviously, L'Jarius Sneed, a solid corner. So, I mean, this obviously tough loss for the Chiefs against the Eagles, but the fact that they were still able to hang tough this way, like obviously the Chiefs are going to make the playoffs, so like our concerns may only be valid for a couple of teams, and obviously maybe Kansas City's seeding, but we'll see if maybe this is something that they can iron out or just find a way to make work in the last month of the season. Maybe like I said before, I don't know, maybe they get more Jerick McKinnon involved, but they did kind of try to early on at times, but I don't know what the fix will be exactly for the Chiefs. I'm sure they'll figure it out, but nonetheless, Eagles get the big win here. Tough, gutsy one. Also, weather may have played a factor too. Like in regards to the absolute last thing, bit rainy, wet, sloppy. That favors more the Eagles, kind of controlling the ball, running the ball, and even like their D line. We saw like obviously that was a big factor too, even though the Chiefs had success. But that favors the Eagles, although the Chiefs are a big and physical team for the most part. Like obviously we know I'm sure you can agree, Eagles are like up there with the Niners in regards to like, hey, these are like D2 top 2, 3. Like these are the biggest, most physical teams. in the league, just in terms of their offensive lines, and that's big, especially in inclement conditions. So, big win for the Eagles. They go to 9-1. So as much as I'm praising the Lions for staying the course, the Eagles are making it tough and really kind of trying to control that 1 seed going forward. But as I'm sure they have a lot of tests ahead of them. So we'll see if they can stay atop the NFC, while the Chiefs, bit tough loss in regards to that, because now AFC standings are very interesting, because now Baltimore, with the Chiefs loss, Baltimore is atop the AFC, and now Chiefs are 7-3, tied with Jacksonville, Miami, and then Cleveland at 5. So, all those, although Cleveland, but regardless, 3 other teams literally on the Chiefs' heels at this moment in time. So we'll see if the Chiefs can get back on track offensively going forward. But those are our Week 11 reactions. Like I said, literally fresh, hot off the press. Anything else you want to throw in or notate before we call it there?
That's going to be it.
All right. Well, that'll do it for John and myself. A little late night pod, although once again, this will be out, not late night. But we'll obviously be back late in the week to do our picks against the spread / bets, obviously for the Thanksgiving games, the Black Friday game, and obviously the Sunday games. But as always, you can feel free to rate and review. That'll do it for us. I hope you all have a good